hope you can gain from today's workshop. So I'm aiming to help you understand the differences between different types of housing and the terminology used when talking about it, including affordable, subsidized, supportive, and emergency or transitional housing. You can also expect to increase your knowledge about housing programs and supports that cater to your particular needs and learn how to apply for them. And last but not least, I hope that after today, you feel more empowered and confident when navigating and accessing housing services and empowered to exercise your right to safe, affordable housing. So we've got a lot going on today's agenda. We're going to start by discussing housing policy in Canada right now, and then discuss subsidized housing programs in more detail. Then we will look at some information specific to seniors, as well as specific to survivors of abuse seeking housing. Then we will talk about homelessness, what it means, and what the current policy approach to it is. We will then look at some more housing resources directed towards people experiencing mental health or addiction-related challenges, as well as towards members of the 2S LGBTQ+ community. We will also discuss information pertinent to newcomers, and I will provide an overview of tenant rights in Ontario. Lastly, I will share some additional resources with you. So the first Canadian social housing policy was actually introduced in 1938, when the National Housing Act made provision for the construction of low-rent housing. Then, in 1949, the Act was broadened to include programs to fund publicly owned and managed housing for low-income families, seniors, and people with disabilities. What about housing policy in the present day? Housing policy in Canada tends to be somewhat non-unified across the country, as it is divided between federal, provincial, and municipal levels. But let's look at the federal level right now. Canada's Housing Action Plan was most recently updated this past April. It involves 3 sections. The first is building more homes. So it aims to do this by bringing down the costs of home building, helping cities make it easier to build homes at a faster pace, and growing the workforce. Second, it aims to make it easier to own or rent a home by ensuring that every renter or homeowner has a home that suits their needs, has protections against fraud, and has the stability to retain their home. Lastly, it aims to help Canadians who can't afford a home by building more affordable housing for students, seniors, persons with disabilities, and equity-deserving communities, and it aims to eliminate chronic homelessness in Canada. So, what do we mean when we say affordable housing? According to the Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation, housing is defined as affordable when a household spends less than 30% of its income on adequate shelter. If a household spends more than 30% of their income on this, their housing is considered unaffordable. Households are defined as being in core housing need if they experience at least one of 3 criteria. Their housing is unaffordable, or it is unsuitable, meaning that there isn't enough space or beds for the amount of people who live there, or it may be inadequate, meaning that it is not in a good condition or needs repairs. So in 2021, a survey found that 1 in 10 Canadian households were in core housing need, and 1 in 5 renter households were in core housing need. The reasons for this were mostly due to unaffordability. For some, it was because their housing was inadequate or unsuitable, and for 13%, there was 2 or even 3 housing challenges that they were facing. So next, I'd like to talk about the different types of housing. We hear a lot of terms being used when talking about it, so I wanted to clarify those. So the first is subsidized housing. This is when you get help paying your rent from either the government or a private organization, and rent is based on what you can afford rather than on the size or type of housing you live in. Usually, this is in the form of rent geared to income. In rent geared to income, you pay about 30% of your monthly income on rent, and the rest is covered by a subsidy. So both Toronto and York regions' subsidized housing programs use the rent geared to income model. Toronto specifically calls their program rent geared to income, and even though York region's program is just called subsidized housing, it also uses RGI. You may have also heard the term social housing. So this just refers to subsidized housing where the subsidies are specifically provided by the government rather than a private organization. What about supportive housing? So supportive housing refers to a combination of housing, services, and programs for people with physical health, mental health, and/or addiction challenges. It helps support people to maintain their housing and manage their health at the same time. Those supports can depend on the program, but they may include independent life skills training, health and wellness, education, community linkages, crisis intervention, eviction prevention, clinical support, and more. Depending on the program, supportive housing is also often subsidized. There's also emergency and transitional housing. Emergency housing refers to short-term accommodation for people who are homeless or in crisis. And at these places, you can get basic necessities such as food, a place to sleep, clothing, laundry, and so on. Shelters are probably the most common example of emergency housing. Transitional housing is supportive accommodation meant to bridge the gap from homelessness to permanent housing. So it tends to be more long-term than emergency housing, but it is still temporary, usually about 3 months to 3 years, somewhere in that range. There's also cooperative housing. A housing cooperative, or a co-op, is a type of nonprofit housing where members, that is, the people who live there, have a say in important decisions for the building, including rent. Housing co-ops do not have tenants and landlords, but rather, by living in a co-op, you become a member and share voting rights with all residents, as well as the responsibility of managing the building. So if you are eligible, your rent will most likely be lower than in a privately owned apartment, or it may even be subsidized. I wanted to clarify what this type of housing is to distinguish it from typical subsidized housing, but that said, I will not be going into much detail about co-op housing today. You can find more information about it if you're interested on the Cooperative Housing Federation of Canada website. So next we'll discuss subsidized housing in more detail. So Toronto's subsidized housing program is called Rent Geared to Income, and the rent through this program is typically 30% of a household's monthly adjusted family net income, or AFNI. That said, if you receive social assistance, so that would be the Ontario Disability Support Program, or ODSP, or Ontario Works, then the rent you pay would be based on the rent benefit set by the Ontario government. To be eligible for RGI, there needs to be at least one member of the household who is 16 years of age or older, and this member must be able to live independently with or without support services. The household income cannot exceed the allowable limits as per the annual local housing income limits. These exact amounts will be discussed in the next slide. Total household assets must be within asset limit requirements. So in the application process, all members of your household who are 16 or older must declare non-exempt assets. You can find more information about what assets are exempt or must be included on the City of Toronto RGI website, which will be linked in the resource document that I mentioned, which will be shared after the presentation. If you are unsure about whether an asset you have must be declared or is exempt, you can declare it, and Access to Housing, which is the organization that manages these applications, that will be responsible to ensure exempt assets do not count towards your household's total assets. However, any member of your household who's receiving basic financial assistance through Ontario Works or ODSP is not required to declare assets. So through this process, if the total value of your household's non-exempt assets is determined to be greater than $150,000, then you will not be eligible to receive RGI assistance. So to continue, each member of the household must have status in Canada, and household members who are 16 years of age and older cannot owe money to a social housing provider already and cannot have any convictions related to rent geared to income housing. So these are the housing income limits that I mentioned. So to qualify for RGI assistance in Toronto, your income has to be below these set out limits, and that depends on the type of unit that you're looking for. So for instance, if you were looking for a 2-bedroom apartment, then to be eligible, your household income would need to be below $71,500. So the Toronto RGI program also has several groups who can receive priority access to subsidized housing in the order they're listed here. So the first group would be survivors of family or domestic abuse or human trafficking. The second being current rent geared to income tenants that need to move to a smaller unit due to changes in their household. The third would be terminally ill applicants with less than 2 years to live. Next would be tenants relocating to RGI housing from supportive housing. Fifth is applicants experiencing homelessness. Then heads of household aged 16 or 17 years old at the time of applying. And lastly, applicants who identify as Indigenous. So if you're part of a group that is not listed here, then you would not receive priority access, as these are the only ones who do. So you can apply from this link listed here, myaccesstohousingto.ca. Once you open the website, you'll see this login page, the image on the left. If you don't already have an account, then you'll want to click the link that says click here to register. Then you will see the image on the right. So if you haven't begun an application yet, then you would click I do not have an application. Once you register, you'll have to provide some information and supporting documents about yourself, as well as any co-applicants, meaning other members of the household who are 16 years old or older. You will also have to enter some information about your dependents, if applicable, as well as your income and assets. Applicants who were already on the centralized waiting list prior to the implementation of the online portal, My Access to Housing TO, should have been sent a registration letter in the mail to the address that they provided along with their existing application. If you are an applicant and have not received this information, you can call the Application Support Center, whose number will be on the next slide. So the required documents in the process would be Status in Canada documents, which would include a Canadian citizenship card, a permanent resident card, proof of application for Canadian permanent resident status, or proof of status as a refugee claimant or convention refugee. You would also need to provide your most recent notice of assessment from the Canada Revenue Agency. This will be required in order to accept a housing offer, though you can submit an application without it. And then you would need supporting documents for priority applications, if that's something you're applying for, or requests for modified units or additional bedroom, for example, if you have accessibility needs. Special priority applications will be further discussed later in the presentation. Also, the City of Toronto has a pretty useful applicant guide to walk you through this process, and that will be available in the resource document later. So there's a pretty long wait list for subsidized housing in Toronto, so it will take some time to receive an invitation to participate in the offer process. For the current cycle, applicants were invited to participate in the housing offer process if they applied before January 1st, 2016, or if they are a senior applicant who applied before January 1st, 2018. The exception to this would be if you qualify for special priority access. Once you are invited to participate in the process, you will be able to view available units or vacancies that you are eligible for based on the number of household members you have and whether you qualify for units or buildings with particular mandates, like seniors only mandates. And I will discuss seniors housing in a little more detail soon. When you have received this invitation, your Access to Housing portal will look like this image on the screen, and you can click Current Cycle, where the arrow is, to view current available or vacant units. So this process then operates on a cycle where vacant units are available to view and then are refreshed every 2 weeks. So during the cycle, you can view these units online and express interest in the ones that would work for you. Note, importantly, that Toronto follows the one offer rule as of a few years ago, meaning that you can express interest in as many units as you like, but you will only receive one offer. If you reject or ignore this offer, you will lose your spot on the waitlist. So make sure to only express interest in a unit if you actually plan to accept it. This is also how the York Region system works because it is a provincial requirement. So once the time period to express your interest ends, the housing provider will contact the person who is ranked the highest on the waitlist out of all of those who expressed interest in their unit. Then, if you receive an offer, you are typically expected to respond within 2 business days. So moving on to York Region subsidized housing program is pretty similar, but I'm still going to go through it just because there's a few details which are different. So this provides rent subsidies to individuals and families with low to moderate incomes, and recipients pay rent based on income, which is again typically calculated at 30% of the household's income. Again, people receiving social assistance would often pay a different fixed rate. So the eligibility criteria is as follows. At least one household member must be 16 years or older. All household members must be Canadian citizens, permanent residents, or have refugee claimant status. You must not owe money to a former community housing provider. No household member can be convicted of an offense related to RGI assistance. And the annual household income must be less than $80,000. And the total value of all assets owned by all members of your household who are over 16 must be less than $75,000. Bank accounts, investments, and real estate are examples of assets. Some assets, including registered retirement savings plans, registered education saving plans, and registered disability savings plans, are not counted towards the limit, but you must still declare them. Note that York Region also has several priority groups, which include survivors of domestic abuse, survivors of domestic abuse, immigrants experiencing abuse from a sponsor, or survivors of human trafficking. These categories will be discussed in more detail later on. And the last eligibility criteria is that the applicant must be able to live independently with or without supports. So to do this, you would apply online. The link is in the slides and will also be in the resource document. You would complete all sections on the application form, and you could access that. Once you click this link, you'll see this page, create an account here, and you would click, I do not have a registration code. If you do, meaning that you've already started your application, but you don't have an online account, then you would contact your waitlist manager to get that code. So once you open the form, then for each member of your household, you would have to include proof of your status in Canada. So a Canadian birth certificate or passport, a Canadian citizenship document, permanent resident card, or record of landing convention refugee documentation or refugee claimant form, as well as your income and asset information. So York Region also has a similar online housing offer process. So there's a 2-week vacancy cycle. Once you receive the invitation to participate, you'll be able to view that and view vacancies that you are eligible for, express interest. And then 1 week after it opens, the vacancy cycle will end. And sometime in that next week, you'll potentially receive an offer if you are the top ranked applicant on the wait list who expressed interest in a certain unit. Again, make sure to only express interest in vacancies that you actually intend to accept, because you will only receive one offer. And if you decline it or don't respond, then you will have to restart the application process and lose your spot on the waiting list. So do be careful of that. So next, I'm going to talk about some housing for seniors, both subsidized and supportive housing. So Toronto has a the subsidized housing for seniors in Toronto is just part of the main subsidized housing program. There is no priority access in RGI housing. However, there are over 40 buildings in Toronto with a seniors mandate, meaning they have units that are specifically set out for seniors, or the whole building only accepts seniors. So this system means that although there isn't priority access, the wait time does tend to be less than for non-senior applicants. So you can see those wait times here. For a senior studio, it is 8 years compared to the longer wait times of other types of places. So the eligibility to apply for seniors buildings is being 59 years of age or older. So you apply through the typical subsidized housing process that I just outlined. And once you are invited to participate in the offer process, you will automatically be able to view buildings with a seniors mandate in the portal and express interest when units become available. If you apply before you turn 59, but you already have an application on file, then you can update it online to be a seniors application once you turn 59. Toronto also has a supporting housing services program. So this is a community-based program operated by the City of Toronto that tries to promote independent living for seniors in 9 designated subsidized buildings. And you will see a list of those on the next slide. So to be eligible, you must be 59 years of age or older. You must also be a current tenant in one of those 9 buildings. You must need assistance with personal support or homemaking services, or require the availability of 24-hour intermittent on-site assistance. You must be medically stable and able to direct your own care, and you must be able to self-medicate, with or without reminders. The benefits of this program would include assistance with personal care, light housekeeping and laundry, medication reminders, safety checks, light meal preparation, and certain health and wellness activities and education. If you have any questions about these, you can contact the number here. So the way to apply for this is you have to go through the main subsidized housing system through Access to Housing TO. Or if you're not sure where to start, you can call this number here. Once you are a tenant in those buildings, which are listed here, the 9 buildings that have supporting housing services, then you would call or visit your building supportive housing office to proceed with the application and assessment process to determine if you are eligible. So York Region also has a similar system where seniors do not have specific priority access for subsidized housing. However, there are seniors buildings, and there tends to be a lower wait time for that compared to other units. You can see it's usually 9 years or 9 years approximately here compared to much longer than that for other rooms. So to be eligible, all members of your household must be 60 years of age or older in order to express interest in seniors buildings. And like I said, the application process is the same as the regular waitlist. Once you become eligible for the housing offer process, you'll be invited to participate, and you can view vacancies and express interest in seniors buildings. York Region also has a Housing with Supports program, which is separate from the subsidized housing program. So this program offers housing and daily meals for people in York Region who need supervision of their daily living activities and includes financial assistance for those who cannot afford the full cost. To be eligible, you must be at least 18 years of age, so it is not exclusive to seniors, although seniors are one category of people who are eligible. You must require supervision in activities of daily living. You must be ineligible for long-term care. You must require financial help, and you must either be the recipient of mental health services or have a mental health diagnosis, have a physical and or a developmental disability, or be a frail elderly person. If you have any questions about this, you can contact the number listed here. So the benefits of this would be assistance covering the cost to stay at a home, a monthly allowance to cover personal needs expenses, and the cost of special services offered at the home. So you would apply by, you could click this link and view the different homes available, and you can contact them to book a visit. The staff will then help you decide if the home will meet your needs and can help you apply for financial assistance from York Region if you qualify for it. So I will show you what that page looks like. So that link on that slide will take you to this Housing with Supports page with some information that I shared with you. So you would scroll down to locations, and you can click whatever your area is, and then you could see the different options. So if I click Newmarket, you can see different homes with a description and contact information. So you would choose one that you think would be appropriate, contact them to find more information. So next, we're going to do a poll question. So Ellie is 70 years old and lives in Toronto. She decides to look into subsidized housing. So the question to you is she eligible for priority access to the Rent Geared to Income program? So I'm going to share that poll with you, and you should see that now. So let me know what you think. We've got some mixed opinions. I'll let you think about it for a little while longer. Okay, so I'm going to end it there and share those results with you. So most people said yes, But the answer is actually no, she wouldn't be eligible for priority access. So the reason for this is that priority access for the Toronto RGI program only comprises those 7 categories that I mentioned before, and seniors were not one of those. So unless, as far as we know, unless there's some information about her that we don't know, she would not be eligible for priority access. That said, she could apply through the regular subsidized housing program and join the waitlist there with the intention of living in a building with a seniors mandate. So she would be eligible for seniors buildings, which the wait time does tend to be shorter for. However, this does differ from the priority access program. Okay, so next I'd like to share some information about housing for survivors of domestic abuse. So first off, there are several emergency shelters and transitional housing programs which serve specific populations, such as women who have experienced violence or survivors of domestic abuse. I will provide more information later about how anyone can access emergency housing in Toronto and York Region. So for now, I'd like to focus on expanding on how survivors of abuse can apply for priority access to subsidized housing. So Toronto has the Special Priority Program, which gives households with current or recent experience of domestic abuse or human trafficking priority access to RGI housing or other housing benefits. To be eligible, you must meet the RGI eligibility requirements that I set out before. You must also meet the criteria for either domestic violence and sponsorship abuse or human trafficking, either by living with an individual who is abusing you or another household member, or sponsoring the abused member, or having a member of your household who is being or has been trafficked. They will also accept applications if you do not live with the abuser anymore, but have lived with them in the past 3 months. So the way to apply for this would be to complete and submit a special priority application. So if you are currently on the centralized waiting list already, you can include your application number on the special priority program application. And you can find this application form on the Toronto Rank Your to Income website, and that will also be linked in the resource document. If you are not currently on the waiting list, you will need to complete an RGI application and record the number on your special priority program application. Also, if you have a safety concern about applying for the priority program on your current RGI application, for example, the named abuser might be a member of your current application, then you have the option to either create a new RGI application using a new email address and password, or you can mail the completed special priority application and supporting documentation to Access to Housing's physical address. So otherwise, you would upload the completed form to your My Access to Housing TO account. So the required documents would include proof of joint residency with the abuser. This requirement is not required if you're applying based on human trafficking. And you would also need a verification record completed by a qualified professional. So that means that you must have someone verify your claim of either human trafficking or abuse. Normally, this would be a professional working with you because of the situation. This requires a mandatory 1-page letter of support on an official letterhead signed and dated. And it must be from someone not affiliated with an MCCSS-funded Violence Against Women or Human Trafficking Agency in Toronto. And MCCSS refers to the Ministry of Children, Community and Social Services, or affiliated with the City of Toronto Shelter Program. The letter of support must also be notarized if the verifier does not work with the applicant in a professional role, but has direct knowledge that the application has been subjected to human trafficking or abuse. So for York Region, the Special Priority Program is intended to help survivors of abuse or human trafficking permanently separate from their abuser by providing priority access to subsidized housing. You may be approved for special priority if one of the following applies. You currently live with someone who is abusing you or another person in your household, or you lived with them within the last 3 months, or you don't live with them, but you still experience ongoing abuse from them. Or if you are a sponsored immigrant and your sponsor is abusing you or another person in your household, or you are currently being trafficked or experience trafficking within the last 3 months. So the process for applying for this would be, there's three options. The first would be to apply online with your subsidized housing application. When you just click through the application, there'll be prompts asking about whether you want to apply for special priority, and you can check those. The second option would be to email a request for special priority application package to the email listed here. And the third would be to mail in a request for special priority application package. So the required documents with this package would be electronic or mailed copies of documents dated within the last 3 months that include both your name and the abusive individual's name and your shared address. If both of your names do not appear on a document together, then you can use more than one document to show that you are or were living at the shared address at the same time. So next, I'd like to discuss homelessness in Canada. So homelessness describes a situation of an individual or family without stable, permanent, appropriate housing or the immediate prospect, means, and ability of acquiring it. It can be the result of systemic or societal barriers, a lack of affordable and appropriate housing, individual or family challenges, racism and discrimination, or often a combination of factors. Also, much of homelessness research focuses on youth, who make up 20% of the homeless population in Canada, but it affects people of all ages. Homelessness can look different for different people, but it usually refers to one of the following 4 states. It could refer to people who are unsheltered, meaning that someone is completely unhoused and living on the streets or somewhere else not designed for people to live in. They may also be emergency sheltered, meaning they're staying in temporary overnight shelters. Homelessness can also be in the form of what's called provisional accommodation, where someone is housed at the moment, but the accommodation is temporary or unstable. This category includes people living temporarily with others, but without a guarantee of being able to stay there continually and without immediate prospects for accessing permanent housing. This is sometimes referred to as hidden homelessness. Lastly, some folks are housed, but in a situation that is precarious or unsafe, and thus they're at risk of homelessness. For instance, someone may be facing an imminent threat of eviction. So Housing First is an approach to homelessness which has been adopted by the Canadian government that involves moving people who are unhoused into independent and permanent housing as quickly as possible, with no preconditions. So the underlying principle of this approach is that people are more successful in moving forward with their lives and recovering if they are first housed. This is as true for homeless people and those with mental health or addiction challenges as it is for anyone. Housing in this approach is not contingent upon readiness, sobriety, or compliance with receiving certain services. Rather, this approach is rooted in the idea that all people deserve and have a right to housing. So this involves 3 kinds of supports. The first is housing with supports to help clients find housing, move in, and maintain their housing. There's also clinical supports, which provide or facilitate access to health and social care to help clients achieve housing stability and encourage their well-being. And there's also complementary supports, such as assistance with finding employment, volunteer work, or skills training. So the principles involved in the Housing First approach include providing rapid housing as soon as possible with supports, offering choice in housing, so this is something that's voluntary for people, separating housing from other services, so not conditioning housing on receiving other types of care, respecting tenancy rights and upholding responsibilities, integrating housing into the community, and promoting people's self-sufficiency. So, as mentioned earlier, emergency housing refers to short-term accommodation for people who are homeless or in crisis, where you can get basic necessities, which might include meals, a place to sleep, clothing, showers, or laundry services, among other services. Some shelters might be aimed to specific populations, such as women or youth, for example, while others are open to all. In Toronto, you can contact Central Intake, and they will help you find out whether there is emergency housing available to you. And they can also potentially refer you to transitional housing, if it suits your needs and if there's available space. They can also provide you with relevant information about other supports that you may benefit from, and they can refer you to other services and programs. So this is a telephone-based service with the numbers here on the right, and it operates 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. York Region has a similar service called the York Region Emergency Housing Central Intake Line, and people experiencing homelessness in York Region that are seeking shelter can contact this line. Again, it is 24/7, and the number is listed here. So next, I'd like to discuss resources for people living with mental health challenges or addiction. So the access point is a centralized point where you can apply for various mental health and addiction support services, including supportive housing. The eligibility criteria for supportive housing through the access point includes being 16 years of age or older, having mental health or addiction concerns, qualifying for a housing subsidy under Ministry of Health criteria, being willing to accept some level of support from the housing provider, and living in or planning to live in the access point boundaries, which is Port Union Road to Highway 427 and Steeles Avenue to the lake. Some of their supportive housing programs include the Mental Health Supportive Housing Program, Problematic Substance Use Housing Program, Mental Health and Justice Housing Program, and the Assertive Housing First Mental Health and Justice Program. You can view these programs, view more information, and apply at this link, theaccesspoint.ca, and I will show you what that looks like. So when you go to that website, you'll see at the very top a button here where it says click here to fill out your online application form. So you can click that. And then you'll see the referral form. So you can select what programs you're interested in. So let's scroll down to supportive housing and choose the mental health supportive housing program. And you can select multiple programs if you like. And then you would click next. And then you would fill out information about yourself, your health information, the supports you're currently accessing, and your needs, agency preferences, and yeah, so that is just an overview of what that form looks like. So going back to the slides now. In York Region, for supportive housing, there's a few options. So one is the Housing with Supports program that I mentioned earlier. As I said, it's not only for seniors, it's also available to others who may require supervision of their activities of daily living because of mental health or because of a physical or developmental disability. So it would be the same application procedure as I outlined earlier. And yeah, this is the same slide from earlier as well. There's also a program called Streamlined Access in York Region, which is coordinated by an organization called Your Support Services Network. And it can connect you to services, including housing supports, within your community if you need help with your mental health or addictions recovery. So these include several supportive housing programs. The eligibility criteria for these would be being 16 years of age or older, dealing with a serious mental health concern or addiction, or a dual diagnosis of mental illness and developmental disability, living in York Region or South Simcoe, and being willing to accept some level of support from the housing provider. So you can apply at this link here, yssn.ca/streamlined-access. And some of the programs that the supportive housing programs that it offers are listed below. So they're quite similar to the Toronto programs, and the application form is quite similar as well, so I won't go through it again, but the link will be available in the post-workshop resource document. So there's mental health supportive housing if you have a mental health concern or addiction. There's an option if you have a severe and active substance use challenge, are homeless or marginally housed, and have frequent contact with emergency departments, hospitals, or the justice system. And there's also an option if you have a mental health concern or addiction, are homeless or are at risk of being homeless, and are currently involved with the criminal justice system. So next, I'd like to discuss some resources for members of the 2S LGBTQ+ community. So to understand the housing challenges that some members of the community face, I'll just share some of that here. So although there has been much research on homelessness in recent years, including youth homelessness, there is still a lack of knowledge about 2S LGBTQ+ homelessness in Canada. However, we do know that 2S LGBTQ+ youth in particular are at a higher risk of homelessness, with somewhere between 25 to 40% of homeless youth in Canada identifying as part of the community. For many, this may be because of homophobia and transphobia, sometimes to the point of violence, at home, which caused them to leave. However, queer and trans individuals of all ages also face challenges such as discrimination when accessing housing services. For instance, approximately 1 in 3 transgender individuals have been rejected from shelters due to discrimination towards their gender identity or expression. Furthermore, individuals are often subject to homophobia and transphobia within the shelter system, even if they are able to access shelter. Many 2S LGBTQ+ folks experience discrimination from landlords as well, making it even harder to secure and maintain permanent housing. So I'd like to share some resources for housing specific to this community. So in Toronto, there's the Pacewood Shelter. So in 2022, the 519 established the first ever shelter that was dedicated specifically to 2S LGBTQ+ adults in Toronto. So this is dedicated to newcomers who have arrived through a refugee pathway or are undocumented, and the space prioritizes trans, gender diverse, and non-binary folks. So to access it, you can call the number here and provide a description of the person who is in need of space and their situation. Note that you will only receive a call back if there is a bed available. So the eligibility criteria includes being part of the 2S LGBTQ+ community and 18 years of age or older, as well as being a newcomer who arrived in Canada through a refugee pathway, is in the process of making a refugee claim, or is undocumented. There's also several transitional housing programs I'd like to share. So Friends of Ruby has a transitional house for 2S LGBTQIA+ youth aged 16 to 29 years old that helps them build life skills, get connected to community supports, and work towards living independently. YMCA also established the Sprout House, which is a transitional housing program that provides 1 year of supported residential living for 2S LGBTQIA+ youth aged 16 to 24. In York Region, there is also the Inclusion Program created by Blue Door, which is the first safe housing in York Region specifically for 2S LGBTQ+ youth who are experiencing homelessness. The links to learn more about these programs and apply for them will be in the resource document as well. So next, we're going to discuss some housing resources directed towards newcomers to Canada. So firstly, just recall from earlier, if you are an immigrant and your sponsor is abusing you or someone in your household, you can get priority access for subsidized housing. So you would just follow the same steps for applying for priority access that were shared earlier in this presentation. So now, I'll introduce some places to find helpful information about renting or buying a home as a newcomer. So the Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation provides funding and conducts research regarding Canada's housing system. At the link on this slide here, they have several informational documents available in a variety of languages meant to help newcomers navigate housing in Canada, whether that's renting or buying a home. So I'll show you what that looks like. So that brings you to this page, and information is available in a variety of languages, as you can see, and it is available for renters as well as home buyers, and there's also information about planning and managing a mortgage. So, and all these info sheets are available in other languages as well, as you can see here. So an important tip that they share about home buying includes building a Canadian credit history as soon as possible, which is important to obtaining a mortgage. Some strategies that they suggest for this include opening a bank account as soon as you can and using it regularly, consistently paying your bills on time, applying for small loans from your bank to begin proving that you can pay on time, applying for a credit card, and try to remain with the same employer for an extended period of time. The Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation also has a newcomers product, which provides insured mortgage financing to borrowers who are permanent residents, as well as those who are non-permanent residents who are legally authorized to work in Canada. This is intended to help newcomers access housing that they can afford and that meets their needs. CMHC Newcomers allows increased flexibility and alternative ways to establish credit worthiness for those who do not have sufficient Canadian credit history due to being a newcomer. Settlement services are also a useful resource. These services provide free and confidential support to immigrants and refugees to Canada, and they can help you settle and adjust to life in Canada. The supports include a wide range of services, but in terms of accessing housing, they can be particularly helpful by providing interpretation for newcomers that need assistance accessing services in English or French. They can also help you fill out forms and applications for various programs, including subsidized housing applications. And they can also connect you to other services or agencies that they think would be helpful to your situation. So settlement.org is also a useful website which has a wide variety of articles and information for newcomers and is a great resource to find out more about housing in Ontario, among other topics. 211 is a free and confidential service that easily connects people to critical social and community supports that they need. You can call the number 211 to be connected with someone who will help you find supports, or you can visit the website linked here to browse various services by category, including settlement services and other agencies that will provide support with navigating housing. So next, I'd like to discuss tenant rights in Ontario. So as a tenant, you have certain rights guaranteed by the Residential Tenancies Act. This information may be especially pertinent if you are renting here for the first time. However, these rights apply to all renters in Ontario. So I'll highlight some significant rights in this slide. However, they expand to more than just these. So first, your landlord cannot discriminate against you because of your race, ethnicity, religion, gender or sexuality, family status, marital status, disability, or age. So, for example, a landlord cannot refuse to rent to you because you are a newcomer to Canada or because you have children. Once you move into your home, you have the right to have a home that is safe and in good repair, regardless of whether you knew about it needing repairs before you agreed to live there. You must also have access to heat, hot and cold water, and electricity. Your landlord cannot shut off these services, even if you are behind on your rent. You also have a right to privacy, so your landlord can only enter your home with notice and for certain reasons, or in an emergency. For most units, your landlord can only raise your rent once in a 12-month period, meaning that, and it must be within the legal limits. This year, it is legal to raise rent by 2.5% per year. However, if your unit was first rented out after November 15th, 2018, then it is not subject to rent control, so be aware of that. Furthermore, you can only be evicted for certain reasons, not just because the landlord decides to do so. You also have the right to have children living in your home. And lastly, you have the right to certain documents, including a written copy of your tenancy agreement, written notice of your landlord's legal name and address, and rent receipts. And a link will be available on the resource document to read about your tenant rights in more detail. So this is another poll for everyone. So our friend Ellie that we saw earlier, while she's on the subsidized housing waitlist, she moves into a market rent apartment for the time being. While she's viewing the apartment, she sees that the tap is leaky. Later, she decides to move in and sign the lease. Then she asks her landlord to repair the sink, but he says that because she knew about the problem already, he doesn't have to fix it. So my question is, what do you think? Is the landlord still responsible for repairing the sink? Seems like most people are on the right track. I'll give it a few more seconds for everyone to respond to the poll. Great, so yeah, everyone said yes, which is totally correct. Even though she knew about the issue before moving in, that doesn't mean that the landlord's not responsible anymore. You still have the right to a safe home, and the landlord is still responsible for repairs. Okay, great. So next, I'd just like to share a few more resources. Um, so a first home savings account, or an FHSA, is a registered plan which allows you, if you are a first-time home buyer, to save, to buy, or build a qualifying first home tax-free, up to certain limits. So the yearly participation room for an FHSA is $8,000. In addition, you can carry forward up to a maximum of $8,000 of unused FHSA participation room at the end of the year to use in the following year. So this is a new initiative started in 2023, and it also has a lifetime limit of $40,000. So just to explain this a little more, for instance, if you contribute $2,000 to this account in your first year, then you would have $6,000 unused in the participation room. And you could contribute that to your account the following year, in addition to the yearly $8,000. So in that second year, you could contribute a total of $14,000. And as I mentioned, that would be up to a lifetime limit of $40,000. You can find out more information about the FHSA on the Canadian government website, as well as an estimator tool for how much you could save through this account, which again will be available in the resource document. So one of the last things I'd like to discuss is Housing Help Centers. So the Housing Help Center is a nonprofit agency whose mandate is to help people access and maintain affordable and safe accommodation. Their Housing Help program works with youth, families, newcomers to Canada, and seniors who are homeless, underhoused, or at risk of losing their housing. And they also have services in a variety of languages. These centers hold information sessions, and they can also work with you one-on-one to determine your housing needs and find affordable market rate housing, or help you fill out applications for subsidized housing. They also offer mediation services between renters and landlords and can help you if you need to contact the landlord and tenant board. They also provide financial assistance if you're behind on your rent or utilities and live in the city of Toronto. So these are all of the Housing Help Center locations in Toronto, which you can see here. And here are the ones in York Region. They don't specify the address, so you would have to call for more information. So that's all the content I have to share with you. Here are my references. So I hope you've gained a better understanding of the different housing options and supports available to you, and that you feel more confident in accessing these services. If anyone has any questions, feel free to send them in the chat. I'm just going to keep wrapping up for the moment, but please continue to leave questions if you like. So thanks so much for joining me today for this workshop. You can find OneHub Growth Organization at 205 Torbay Road. Reach us by email or phone listed here, or view our website at onehubgrowth.com or .org. A reminder as well that the recording of this workshop will be available to view on our website soon, as well as our YouTube channel. Great, so thank you so much again for joining me, everyone. I'm glad that a lot of you seem to find this helpful, and I hope that you all enjoy the rest of your night and take care.